before we even are looking at before we're even looking at like what professors to apply for and things like that, I sort of have them think about like what is the lifestyle that they sort of want to live through grad school. There's different types of research that like demands different levels of like attention and like different levels of like needing to be in labs. So if you study things like circadian rhythm, like you need to make sure that you are okay with staying up for 24 hours every once in a while. And so we talk a lot about those sort of things and like differences between like working in the field versus like working in like a lab on like analytical chemistry and stuff like that. So like sitting down and thinking about those sort of things of like what do you want your day-to-day life to be like can be helpful. And then I would say like with actual professors, what I did a lot of was look through the listserv. So there's a couple resources like the Evo Eco listserv and the EcoPhys one. BSA has one as well. And so for me, I kind of already had the idea that I wanted to study how plants like interact with one another, but like so many other people have been dedicating their lives to this for such a long time that it was nice to be able to go through these listservs and see what people were like, what types of projects people were looking for grad students for, to help me like also hone in on like what are the specific things that I'm interested in. That's what I thought was helpful.
I'd like to come in. I'm an international student, and so this was one thing that I sort of like found difficult at first. But I had a friend who was in the US and just sent me an advert about a PI looking for students, and it was in my field. And so that way I just realized that wait, I could just go on Twitter, and it was a Twitter ad. I could just go on Twitter and start to search for keywords, and then I went beyond that, went online and started looking for just search keywords and just professors in the US, and came up with all sorts of papers. And fortunately for me, I found a few papers that I'd read, and then some of these professors were on these papers, and it was just like, okay, well, I think I could reach out to some of these guys. So there's Twitter, there's social media, there's just doing your friends just suggesting to you, there's searching on Google. And one other thing I did was that I just went on, as an international student, you don't really know so many people, and you don't even know so many of these universities. So I just went on universities, there's all these universities database. I think Times Higher Education or something, they always have all the ranks. So I just, pulled out like the first 50 universities and then started doing a deep dive into each one. And it took me a while, but I mean, I knew what I was looking for, so it took me a while, and then I got into it. So I think that depending on your situation, you might want to do a mix of everything. Just and sometimes, so when I emailed professors, some of these professors will say they don't have space, and I don't take that no as a no, right? I just go ahead to ask like, okay, are there people that you think that are looking for students and you know can make do with my own skills and my research interests, or their research interest aligns with mine. They just go ahead and then drop a few names. Sometimes these are names I have on my list, so it's like, okay, good for me then. It's just a confirmation.
We don't all have to answer every question, just so you know. I can't find it now, but there was another question in the Q&A that asked about PhD versus master's and how to figure out which one is best for you.
I'll take a stab at this one since I did a master's first. I love masters. I think they are super useful. The way that my master's advisor put it is masters are a great time to get your stupids out. Like you get to really try research. You get a feel for understanding what grad school is like. And honestly, like another useful thing about it is it gives you this opportunity to like pivot your research if you don't really like what you're doing before it like really starts to like out where people are starting to sort of think about you for like job market and stuff like that. And so for me, like when I did my master's, I did it on like landscape ecology, like counting flowers on mountains and stuff like that, which I love camping, but like I do not want to do that for work like ever again. That was a lot. And so I think they're super useful. However, with like the growing trends now, there's fewer and fewer funded masters, which makes things more difficult. So I recommend doing them, but realize like there's movement away from those being accessible. I think like postbacks are becoming the new sort of masters thing that's starting to be available. But yeah, I think they're really awesome. If you have the opportunity to do a master's before a PhD, like go for it.
Yeah, and I'll touch base because I did like 2 years of working before I started my PhD, but without a master's. So just like Jordan was saying, kind of that post-bac kind of job, kind of set me up for the PhD where I felt like I had enough research experience to be confident in what I was doing, even if it wasn't directly related, and even if it wasn't like a degree in that research. I think something to think about is the timing also. Like most masters in the plant sciences broadly tend to be 2 or 3 years long. PhDs tend to be 5 to 7-ish years long in the United States. So thinking about, can you see yourself committing to something for different periods of time as well? And like Jordan was saying, like things work for different people, and there's still flexibility too. Like every combination I've seen people do a master's, do a PhD elsewhere, do a master's, continue in that lab for their PhD, go straight to PhD, start a PhD, convert that to a master's, do a PhD elsewhere. Every combination is possible. So just because you choose one path, don't feel like you need to stick to that if it ends up not being what you actually want.
I guess I would add something too. So sorry, Karolina. Um, yeah, just like if you like I started grad school, I didn't do a master's. I worked 5 years after undergrad, then went straight into PhD, but I had sort of a project in mind already, and I knew it would take that amount of time to do that. But then like afterwards, I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. Like what job do I want? And I noticed a lot of jobs, they just really require a master's. Some require PhD. And something that I always try to think about or tell people about now is like, well, if you want to go into industry, sometimes it depends on the field. A PhD might price you out of a lot of positions because you're too expensive, because you're too well trained. And so trying to have a little bit of forethought as what you want to do for like a career, like is a PhD really necessary? Could a master's get you like that extra pay bump, and make you more competitive for that position? But again, it's really field dependent, on what you're doing. But yeah, I didn't get a master's. I went straight PhD. So no experience there.
Thanks all. There's a few questions in the Q&A that have to do with timing and sort of the process of applying. Does somebody want to kind of briefly summarize the general timeline of like when you reach out to PIs and kind of what that process looks like at most universities in the US?
I could start. So, oh, Natalie, you wanted to go?
You can I can just
Okay.
follow whatever you say.
All right. Okay. So, I don't know how it is for all professors, but one thing I took note of was that in if you're plant science, for example, or botany, usually we have all of these conferences coming up in like June, July, early August, and so I started just looking for my professors I wanted to reach out. So I started looking for them in like April. I had this spreadsheet and then was just curating because, I knew that I knew that it would take a while for me to come up with a list of all the people I wanted to reach out to. So I just started curating. You can start curating anytime. You can start getting your list in August if you like, but that's what I did. But then I realized that if I started even in June, it might not have been a problem. Right. And then I started reaching out in early August when I realized, okay, it looks like some of these guys at that time, some of them are going on vacation, some of them are going on conferences. And I just felt like maybe they may not want to look at their emails or not want to get too involved in they want to set themselves, free from all the stress of academia and having to reply so many students every day, So I just like thought that okay, I should reach out in July, August. So I started early August, and early August, and I got a few responses. But by September, when school was like, semester had resumed, the fall semester had resumed, I think that many professors get in the mood of like really replying emails and trying to get on top of the situation. So I got lots of responses late August and early September. And for people that were busy, I kept sending reminders like every 5 days, every 7 days, just to make sure that I'm on top of, I'm like at the forefront of their heart, something. So and then sent my application, did all of that, had interviews, Zoom interviews with or Zoom chats with these professors, and then by October I knew the places I wanted to apply to. So for some people, it happened that it didn't happen. All these stages didn't happen till like August, September, and so it was like a rush and all of that. I feel like professors will usually have a list of like 2 or 3 students that they want to choose from by September. And so I just feel that way. I don't know if it's true. And so it may be nice to start early, right? Some people do not even decide that they want to take a student until it's like, okay, wait, November, I think I need a student, right? So and then at that point they start to think about student, but I don't think that's for most people. I think for most people by September and early October, they are set on having 2 or 3 students they want to pick 1 or 2 students from. So that's why it might be nice to start early. And then I sent my applications in November. So I don't know if it's very different with every other person.
Yeah, from what I recall when I was applying, it was pretty similar to your experience. I remember that, like, yeah, over the summer there were a couple people I reached out to, but most of the time I was, um, you know, sending like cold emails and things like that. It was probably more towards like August, September, around that time. And I would say like the earlier the better, because the longer you have to kind of get to talk to, it also depends on the professor too. Some of them aren't going to want to have multiple meetings with you before they either like, sometimes they like invite you to apply. Sometimes it's not really said whether they like invite you to apply and you just like still apply. But it's good to have as many time to have as many conversations as possible. And you kind of base that on each relationship, I would say. And I would, even before I applied, I had Zoom meetings with the people I reached out to over email. We'd set up meetings to talk about, not only like getting to know each other and like, oh, like, here's what I'm looking for, like, here's what you're looking for, things like that, but also just kind of talking about research interests and things like that. So there's the research side, and then there's like the are we compatible professionally side. So we'll probably have all those done. Yeah, I would say like September, October, like you were saying. And then I think I heard, yeah, and then applications in by November. And then I think I heard by anytime like January through February, basically about whether I was going to be accepted or invited out to interview like in person. I don't necessarily recall after that. I was just excited to hear back from people, I guess, and blocked out the rest, but same about timeline.
And I would just add that if you have friends who are applying to like medical schools or more like professional health programs, that the application process to grad school looks very different, where there's no like unified portal where everyone uploads the same things. It's much more on an individual basis. So for things like exact deadlines, you need to like look through the program website, even within the same school. Different departments might have different deadlines, different requirements. So going through those web pages to make sure you're keeping track of all those dates, because it's again, it's imperfect, it's not very centralized. So just keeping track of all those things is important and very different from what your friends might be doing if they're looking at yeah, pre-health type program or health type programs in general.
Yeah, it's very different in the way that I feel like you build up a lot of your, I mean, for medical school and stuff, you interview and do things like that. But I feel like when you're applying in this field, you really have to like you're the one picking which professors you want to talk to. Like you build a lot of like your application and like just like getting in from the ground up by yourself, which it's good to, you know, I'm glad that you guys are all here and, you know, gonna start building this community and we'll hopefully like lean on each other through the process because it is a lot and it's a very intimidating process too as you go through it. But um I don't know. I guess that was kind of like a negative thing to say, but it's also like really empowering too to think about how you know, you really get to like look into yourself and say like, okay, this is what I'm interested in and talk to people who are just excited about those things and then have conversations where you're like, okay, like what can I do with this? And that was my favorite part of grad school, honestly, was just talking to so many incredible professors. And then like once I had my list narrowed down, being like, okay, like now really like where can I see myself? Knowing what I want to do, like how can each of these different paths help me get there? And I think that that's like the cool individualistic thing about this application process and starting your journey in grad school in general.
Kind of on a similar vein, what's some advice for writing that initial email to reach out to a potential PI, right? That's a super intimidating part of this process of sending this email into space and hoping that somebody gives you a reply. So maybe faculty who are on the panel, what do you kind of look for, and what do you recommend in that initial contact email?
So I want to comment on this one because I just brought in 5 PhD students this last cycle. The thing that caught me with all 3 of them, the 3 things that they all did were they had a clear idea of at least one project. They had identified one funding source for their own work, whether it be fellowships or maybe small grants that they wanted to apply for, and they could like articulate as to like why they wanted to get a PhD or like what was necessary about it. And like that was in just short like 2 paragraphs in an email. Most of the time, like as like a new professor, you get like spammed with a bunch of like emails from prospective students, which most of them are just like copy paste from your website. So the more individualistic you can make it, and like also the more you can demonstrate that you are like ready to be an independent researcher, which is what a lot of PhD programs are centered around, is more of the like apprenticeship model where you are your own person and as an advisor you're guiding, you're helping along the way and providing some advice. But yeah, I would try to hammer in those 3 things into an email.
Yeah, so yeah, similar thoughts there. So yeah, it's like lots of emails come through asking to join the lab. A lot of them are just copy paste, or it's my website exactly as I have it worded, and those kind of don't get responses because there's a lot and I can't respond to everything. But yeah, the ones that really stand out are the ones where they tell me who they are, why are they applying to grad school, what interests them about them, and then they have a section on like what are they going to work on in the lab, like why are they applying to work with me? And so I recommend to some of my students is like you have your like who am I section, and then you have the why your lab section. And the who I am section, you can copy paste to every email, but then you have that individualized section that is specific to the person that you are applying to. And then I always recommend too, like basically you want to reduce the amount of work we have to do in terms of like seeing how you fit. Essentially, like if you say like, oh, I'm interested in plants, and that's why you're applying to the lab, then we have to do a lot of mental work to be like, okay, well, how could you fit? Like, what could you work on? So if you can come with just like some quick little things or short, even I mean one project, yeah, like that would be great. Like, oh, this is one thing I could work on. And we're like, great, we'll build on from there. Those are the emails that kind of like stand out. Or my most recent student, he doesn't work on monocots, but he's done anatomy and he's doing phylogenetics and he wants to do that. And I was like, great, I'm really into anatomy, or I want to be, and he's doing phylogenetic stuff already. Great. He was in a different group, but he kind of like had that project in mind. He wants to do this. It's interesting to him. And I was like, come on over. And stuff like that. So it's just like, yeah, it's really the work thing. Like, I hate to say that, but there's just a lot going on. And so if you can make our job easier for seeing how you fit, then it's gonna like stand out. To me at least. Maybe not everyone, but
I'm not a PI, but listening to my PI kind of field these emails right now as they come in. I think one thing that she gets kind of frustrated with is just like she can tell that she's like, I just feel like people like haven't read my website or like haven't read my papers, and like kind of like what you were saying, Cody, with people just being like, oh, like I'm interested in plants. I think like one major turnoff, I think, as she's going through those emails, just as I've talked to her, is like I can just tell that like they haven't really like taken like a deep dive and gotten to see like if they would fit in the lab. And so I think that doing as much like research as you can to just see like, you know, what that PI actually does, and like what you were saying too, like kind of build around like how you would fit into that larger framework of the lab is important. But take that from someone who isn't a PI.
So yeah, I want to follow up with what Cody said. When I applied to when I was sending out all of these emails, I just made sure that I didn't have so many words in my emails because I felt like I'm just gonna be stressing. If you send me so many words, I'm gonna be stressing myself. Like I'm gonna be stressed out trying to understand everything, in a message, right? So I like to keep my emails below like 200 words, if possible. And it's always difficult to like put in so many content in 200 words. But in a way, I just found a way that it worked. I had like the introductory section, one paragraph, and then a second paragraph talking about how we align and how our research interests align, and a third paragraph on where I'd like to like sort of go from there or what skills I have, right? So and sometimes my our research interests may not like our research models may not align, but the research interests may align. For example, my PI is working on viburnum and CAM photosynthesis and all, but I've never worked on those. But I'm good with, plant development, plant anatomy, phylogenetics. So that way it was easy to like know, how we fit. So it's possible that, the person you're also applying to may not have studied, may not work on, what models or system you're trying to work on. But it's also good that they know what your research interests are on a broad scale and then on a very focused scale. And that's what I try to do with my own emails. And I think I got responses for over 50% of the emails I sent. So it's nice to keep it short and just straight to the point. Then they also want to see a connection. Right? I came in, I asked my PI, like, why did she choose me over the other person? And she was she was like, just felt a connection, like there's somebody that has read my work and had an idea of what I'm doing from some other part of the world, right? So I guess PIs want to see that as well, so.
Awesome. Okay, so let's imagine that you get a positive response from a potential PI via email, and they have asked to set up a Zoom call to chat with you. What advice would you give folks for what questions to ask, what might happen in this Zoom call?
I think even before you have the Zoom call, like you have to have a sit down with yourself and really figure out like what do you need from an advisor and what do you want. Like for me, I knew I wanted an advisor that I would feel comfortable like having a beer with, that I could like kiki with and just like talk about all aspects of my life. Those were the things that were important. And so for me, in going into that first Zoom conversation, we were talking about research ideas. I was throwing out the things that I was interested in, project ideas, things along that. But the things that I was looking for were like how were they responding to like project ideas that I was telling them? Did they look like they were thinking about it? Did they sound excited? Do they seem like they would be somebody who I would feel comfortable with, like crying in their office? Is it like it happens? Grad school is stressful and like all of those sort of things. So I would really figure out what you need in that instance before you sort of move into there, so you can ask them about their like work-life balance style and things like that. Because there's other people who are like, I just want a boss that I come in 9 to 5 and I don't think, hear, see, talk about them anytime outside of those hours, and like that's perfectly fine too. But you got to figure out whatever that personality fit is.
Yeah, and I'll weigh in as so I'm an associate professor, but my institution is undergraduates only. So from my perspective, I'm usually helping my undergraduates to prepare for some of these interviews. And so if you have a current mentor, like ask them if they can do a practice interview with you. Like I've set up a Zoom, had my students sit in like the room next to me and Zoom pretending, right, that I was interviewing them. And so being confident in like what that looks like, talking over Zoom, right? It's part of our lives now, but being one-on-one in that scenario and just being ready and confident to talk about, I think, especially like any particular projects and just why you're interested in grad school and that program overall. And I know like from some of my students, they've had some like pretty off the cuff questions from some PIs also. So be ready for like maybe some atypical questions. And also like that's an opportunity for you to get that personal fit again, like Jordan was saying, like figure out if you'll work together. And if some of those questions are like super out of left field, like maybe it's not the right one for you, not the right match. And so that's also like information to take from that experience.
Yeah, I just when I do Zoom interviews with uh prospective students, I have like a set of questions. I ask them all the same questions. It's just five, pretty laid back. I make it clear to them that it's like casual. I just want to have a conversation, because I want to just see how we get along. And so I typically will just have them tell me about themselves, like what have they done, what are they interested in doing in the future, and then I really try to keep a lot of the space for them to ask me questions because I want them to know like what's the situation like at Oklahoma State University, funding, I always get asked about my mentoring style, and so um, yeah. And so yeah, I just typically have a little chat with them about things and stuff. So I'm a little bit, I don't know, maybe atypical. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember, like you were saying, you had questions. I remember in the first part of those initial talks, like having questions from the PIs, but then also, like you were saying as well, there's this space where I feel like I went in thinking it was going to be like an interview where I would just be like responding, but no, it's really much uh like a space where you have a conversation with the PI and you do get to talk about those things like work-life balance. Like one important thing for me was like financial stability and like looking for like does the institution have a lot of opportunities for like in institution funding, things like that. And so it's good to, like everyone has said so far, just think like, okay, like what do I really want to make sure that I ask and like what's important to me to figure out in these early interviews and kind of have that loaded up to bring when it's your time to ask those things in the space. Because it really isn't just like oh, I'm going to ask like these 5 questions and then it's over. Like, I don't know. I remember being like, oh, like I have to talk and come up with things. But it was good. It just gives you time to see if it's truly a good fit for you because only you can ask those questions or only you can ask the right questions for yourself, and that's when you do it. So
Yeah. Bouncing off that, I remember also asking like really personal questions. For example, I have a family, I have a wife, and it's like, how is it like with, working in your lab and what are the expectations with someone that has a family? Because you also want to be, you don't want to get in a lab where the PI may be a good person, but just is not sensitive to family and all of that. So you want to be sure that there are specific questions, and I do not shy away from asking any questions. Like what are the extra funding available? Are there facilities to work with, or do I have to like help with another PI in another institution or within the school? You want to be specific about questions. And it's hard. It may be hard to read body language if you're on Zoom, but you see I like to feel the vibe, right? You feel the connection, the vibe, there's either an excitement or a concern or a disappointment in the way they respond to you, and even the way the way they receive your whatever you say. So you want to be able to maybe read. You may not read it perfectly, but in a way try to understand the demeanor they're giving. So this helps you know if you're going to connect on a very good level, or if they're just faking it, or if they're just, there's a way that you will feel it. And I think it's also nice to be logical and not be hyper emotional about, I really love this person, but they don't like, if you have red flags, I think it's something to consider, right? When going, you may end up becoming their collaborator in future, right? But in the immediate, is it the best for your PhD? You want to think about all of that. So personal questions and specific questions should be asked, I think.
Yeah, thanks all. That was all really great advice. I answered some of this question in the actual Q&A, but we've gotten so many of this question that I figure maybe we just address it out loud. We've gotten a lot of questions that are asking, how many places do you apply to? What is the right answer?
I can just say there probably isn't a right answer. There definitely isn't a right answer. So when I applied to grad school, I applied to one, two, three. I applied to three. And that's what I did. And yeah, I got into one, luckily. So yeah, and I never heard, well, I heard back from the other two. It was a rejection. But yeah, I applied to three. And I don't know. It's uh, it's expensive to apply to grad schools, to grad programs. I remember at that time I was living in Los Angeles, so it was expensive, and then I had to pay for all of these grad application fees, and then had to like do the GRE and all this and that. So it was a lot. But yeah, I did three, and I did those three because those labs were directly related to what I wanted to do, and I decided not to do any more other than that. So yeah, I just did three. Long-winded answer to say three.
I think my answer is also three that I applied to. You may have noticed, like from the previous discussions, that a lot of emphasis on talking to people, like making initial contact, making sure it's the right fit, and so on. And so it's very different from applying to undergraduate, also, where there's no common application. A lot of time and investment into each application, and therefore, like doing 20 or so is just doesn't seem feasible at all. So I would say like 3 to 5. And then, we don't talk about rejection as much as maybe we should, because it's part of academia and part of life overall. And so if there's no good fit for you in your first year applying, like don't get discouraged. Like keep applying, because a lot of this is based on personnel. How many people are in the lab? Does that person have an open spot? And so it doesn't even mean that like you're not a good candidate. It might mean that it just the cards aren't going to work this time around, but it doesn't mean that you should be 100% discouraged either, overall.
I think adding on to what Nora was talking about, I think we should maybe comment a little bit also on like how applications and like admissions like work from the faculty side. So just so you guys know, so often like if you do get rejected from something from a program, it's not doesn't necessarily have to do anything with you. So what happens is essentially a giant pool of everybody's applications for the department goes in, and there's a committee that'll sit through and sort of make sure that everybody is meeting the bare minimums. And then all the faculty in the department, or this is how it works for my department. All the faculty will get an email that says, all right, here are the applicants. If you know any of these applicants or like want to request them for your lab, like let us know. And then so we'll then have to go through this, find your name and say, yes, I want to have so-and-so in my lab because of X, Y, and Z. So now they have this list of like, what professors want what students. And then after that, each professor then gets like ranked based off of like whether they like need students. So like if you're a junior faculty, often you're going to get more priority in getting like students for TA lines. If you are planning to bring a student in on like a grant or something, so the department doesn't have to pay for anything, then you get priority. So it's all of these other things are also going on at the same time, just so that you guys are aware of what the process is. So yeah, just reiterating, if you do get rejected from something, like it doesn't have anything to do with you some of the time, or a good portion of the time.
Yeah, and here it's like you can have, a great application, or you can have the one PI that is really excited about you, but here the faculty collectively vote on whether or not to get all the grad students. So sometimes it's kind of out of the PI's control, because maybe not everyone is like, no, no, yeah, sometimes a little bit of politics can come into play sometimes, and it's not necessarily you, it's just some faculty, they want a student, and so they're going to vote no on everybody or something. It does happen. And stuff. So yeah, there's all this stuff behind the scenes that's going on that's not necessarily a reflection of you and your application. And then along those points, if you get rejected and say there's not other schools, you can always still continue to look for other labs afterwards if you find out. It depends on institution, but like here, um, um, we can often take students up until May. And so we can like be like, oh yes, I want this student for the fall, the upcoming fall, and they have to make their decision by May, and then the paperwork gets through. So you don't necessarily have to like, say give up hope if say your fall applications all get rejected, there could be potential to join a lab still. You just do it later in the spring. It just again, it depends on the institution. But that's like here that can happen. Maybe not everywhere, but so yeah, there's options.
On a prior comment about it being expensive, absolutely. Yes, like those application fees do add up over time. And so kind of going off of like whittling your way down, I think is really important because like when you cast a wide net, you're applying to a lot of things. But I wanted to say that I remember when I was applying, like so through college, I was like I went to college on Pell Grants, basically like money was always kind of a worry for me. And so I remember going into grad school and being super intimidated just about how like every single one was like from like 60 to sometimes over like $100 depending. And so something I wanted to say is to look out for fee waivers. Sometimes you can apply for a fee waiver, and sometimes it's just like by a certain date. You just have to make sure you're on top of those things and let the proper people know that that's something you might need by that time. But then also if they don't offer a fee waiver, maybe you could talk to like the PI too and just be like, hey, like I really want to apply to your lab, but this is a barrier to me right now. I didn't do that. I kind of wish I had. And I don't know, I think it would just depend on the person on how it would go. But I think that, that would be okay to do as well. I don't think that like money should be a barrier to someone like, $60 should be a barrier to someone like getting in the lab that they truly think would be the best fit for themselves. But yeah, I think it really is important to acknowledge like, you know, it's a big financial investment. And sometimes money's really hard when you're coming out of undergrad or when you're coming out of a master's, just depending on where you're at in life. And there's ways that have been built in to help you kind of navigate that.
Yeah, I I want to hammer on what Natalie said and totally agree. I applied to seven schools and got offers in six of them, and I paid for only one, and I had application fee waiver was like a deal breaker for me. So I did not apply to well, I did not apply to most schools that, don't give application fee waivers. However, there were like three other PIs that I really wished I got into their lab. And so, after all the conversations and all, I just reached out to them, spoke with them, and they were very happy to pay. Some of them had like fee waiver codes from their department. Some of them used their credit card. They just got my portal and then just put in their credit card details and all of that. And so it was helpful for me. Unfortunately, I didn't choose some of them, but it just made me realize that okay, these guys, can be helpful, right? I enjoy the benefits from the professor. They may not even be the richest of professors, right? But I think that they also understand that as people coming from either undergrad or something, you may not be able to pay for everything. So yeah, so that's one thing. Another thing is that if you feel like you're not going to be able to pay for it. And there's maybe, especially if you're an international student, and there's maybe no application fee waiver or the PIs, it doesn't look like they're going to help out. Right? There are people that you could just reach out to, especially if you're an international student, right? And there are ways that, we raise funds for people, other international students to pay. So, for example, every year I pay for at least one or two people, right? And the other people like me will pay, right? So you may also be on the lookout for this kind of, assistance, right? So that you don't miss out on what may be, the best thing for you.
I'm not a member of this panel officially, but I will just reiterate that applicants who need a fee waiver, definitely reach out to your PI. Like at here, we don't have anything through the graduate school, but if you ask the PI directly, we have funds in the department. So it's always worth asking. And it's also, unfortunately, kind of a good way to see if there's a red flag there, right? If somebody is dismissive of this or is not willing to go to bat for you, think carefully about that.
Just wanna second that. Just always ask, because just like here we have departmental funds, not grad funds, and so if you ask, there's things we can do, hopefully. So
Okay. So this is kind of a bigger picture question, but and there's two sides to it. On one side, how do you as a PI maybe evaluate applicants? And on the other side is how do applicants make themselves most competitive for the graduate application process?
Yes, I can jump in. So, in order to answer this question, I have to give a little bit of context about my lab. So, like, our lab is primarily an analytical chemistry lab. So, we have a mixture of grad students that are chemists that want to be biologists and biologists that want to be chemists. And so, I'm making the assumption that everybody here is more on the biologist side. If anybody is on the chemist side, like, very different advice. But from those on the biologist side, like, most of the students who are coming into my lab don't have like the explicit skill sets for how to like run instrumentation and things along those lines. And so for me, what I'm normally looking at for grad students is figuring out what types of jobs you've had that can demonstrate some sort of management capability, like what is your project management skill set, and sort of other aspects that like demonstrate how resourceful you are. Those are the core things, because it does take, in my lab, it takes a large degree of like teaching yourself a good amount of the tools and techniques to get up to par to be able to use some of the instruments. And so I have to like sort of figure out what skill sets and or jobs you have that would let me know that you can sort of meet those goals. Yeah.
yeah, so so typically if I'm having someone apply, or if someone applied to my lab, it's because I told them they should apply to the lab. Um, and typically I will always ask that they send me their application before they submit it, and I will typically give feedback. And we're in a bit of a difference. We're a really small department for now. And so really what it's looking for is like, can you put a thought together? Can you make a nice cohesive application? Can you explain why you're joining grad school? And then can you explain like why this lab, what you might do in this lab, and things like that. So it's again a bit laid back on my end, but I will edit the documents and just kind of make it clear like why this person would be a good fit for the lab, and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of how it works in the other biology department here as well. It's just like the application just has to demonstrate that you can put an application together, you can explain who you are, why you're coming to grad school, why you're joining the lab that you want to join, and then like calling out, like specifically saying that lab in the application as well. Because if the application is just generic or it doesn't identify anybody, the committee that is going through all of these, it'll just make it harder for them, or you'll get pulled maybe in like a no lab specified folder. So you want to like mention the PI that you would want to join and make it clear why it's them. And so again, tailoring your application to that lab helps a lot. I don't know if I had any real advice in there, but yeah.
What about in terms of experiences? Are we expecting necessarily that everybody comes in with 3 papers published? You need research experience in the exact field that you want to go into?
I hadn't published at all. I came
I
straight
think
from
that's
under.
common. Yeah.
I
Sorry.
okay. Well, from the side of student, I don't know. I think just get the vibe. Fortunately for me, I had some research experience. I have a master's, and I've done like 1 year research fellowship, and so it was I was lucky. But for most people, I had papers that I didn't even talk about, right? So, but for most people, they don't have research experience, or they don't even have experience beyond some of the group works and small researches they did in undergrad, and they're still getting. And I think that's for most people, right? It's more like just in every opportunity you have to strengthen your experience in undergrad, take it, because it may not even be the experience that's giving you the PhD position. It might be the network with your PI, your undergraduate professor or something that is giving you the PhD position, because they just see that, oh, you're very good, you're a hard worker, and you're committed to that particular field. They may just, network you with somebody else. So you eventually, it may not be your experience that gets you in, but the network. So whatever it is, just um do what you do it well, I guess. And then, but if you have the experiences that we sometimes find hard to sell, like you have group works that you've done, it's like group projects. I always advise that you find a way to sell it well. If there are group projects that can pass off as a research experience or as an experience, sell it as good as possible. There are 10 papers that are like actual research. All of these are experiences that can be sold, So do not discount or do not just throw away any experiences you've had all through undergrad and think that, oh, I have to do this one big project, right, to get the experience. No, right? You may just work on R for like 1 semester. It's an experience, right? You may just work on like one small assignment or homework or something that you had to go do, in-depth literature review and all of that. So all of these are experiences that add up to, make you prepared for grad school. I think that you should find a way to package, all of this in your SOP. And one thing I always did was that when I reach out to all of these PIs, I would always ask, especially when they've agreed that I should apply, I would always ask them to review my, SOP. So every one of them always had something that made it better. And so I just like put it all together. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that in the presence of the PIs, but I just like put all of that together, and then it makes my SOP way better than I expect it to be. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of expectation for experiences when applying to the lab. I kind of base everything off how I was, which I had a project in mind. But I could not read a phylogeny. I knew nothing how to do any of it whatsoever. I'd never worked in a lab. I'd never done any of that. I had this project that I wanted to work on, and that was enough. And so that's kind of just how I look at things. It's like, can they come up with an idea? And then we'll figure other things out as we go along. And that, to me, that's kind of the point. This is a training. And so you're going to learn a lot of skill sets. If you have skill sets, you should definitely highlight them. But for me, it's not like a deal breaker. If you're like, I want to do phylogenetics, but I've never done it at all whatsoever. I'm like, great, we'll learn.
Yes, grad school is a learning opportunity. Should remember that. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. If folks have to leave, please, I put a link in the chat to a Google form, a sort of post-event survey. We'd really appreciate you checking that out and giving us your thoughts on this event. It helps us plan and develop programs for the future, for this Botany 360. And we're also winding down on the Q&As. So, I don't think we need to all stay here beyond the questions that are available. Maybe we wrap up with some final advice from our panelists for folks who are in the process of thinking about graduate school or applying to graduate school. Final piece of advice.
I have to leave pretty soon, so I'll just say that when you're applying to school, remember that however long you're in grad school, whether it's a master's or PhD, you're also continuing to be a person, and to think about like what your priorities are, what your goals are, and to make sure those align. I know there were some questions about like where to apply, like geographically, like realize that you're going to live in that place and you're going to have a life outside of grad school too. And to try and find that balance of, if there's a place you could never imagine living, like don't apply there if you don't think you could live there ever. So, remember that like your value is not tied to grad school, but to like have confidence in yourself and like stick to who you are too.
Yeah, I guess final, I don't know. Yeah, along with geographic, like it's, I'm in rural Oklahoma, and so I always make that very clear to students that are applying, and I talk about what it's like here, for people of various demographics and backgrounds. So yeah, that's something to really consider, and cost of living. I'm upfront with students about cost of living, for here. And then yeah, it's something I didn't really think about when I was going into grad school, but it's definitely something to think about as well. But yeah, I guess my piece of advice or whatever would just be like, get that initial email sent and make it pop, to whoever it is that you're emailing and individualize it. And then I think you'll see that by doing that, you'll probably get more of a response rate and success rate, hopefully. Yeah. And this is a training and a job. It's important too.
So I just want to say that when you're applying, so I don't know the best subjects, to use for your emails. I just use the application to join your lab as a PhD student. So whatever you use is fine. But if you don't get, if a PI says they're not taking a student or they don't want you, not like, oh, that came out bad. Like that they're not taking a student at this time. Do not don't be discouraged, right? Go ahead to ask them if there are people that they can suggest to you, because eventually you're going to come in this space and then also be with them, meet each other at conferences and all of that. So, and they may even forget that you applied to their lab, or some of them may even just jokingly say you turned them down and all of that, But all of these experiences or the opportunities to network with professors, even if they don't, if you don't end up working together. So do not take it in bad faith, right? Just they're also humans, right? So just make sure that you, as much as possible, stay in touch with them, and then say hi to each other at conferences. Who knows, they may end up working together, and collaborating on papers. Yeah.
And then I guess last piece of advice from me is just like make sure when you're sort of in the process of selecting where you're applying and who you're going to be working for, like don't diminish the small things of like thinking about how they fit as a mentor, the social elements and stuff like that. Like you're committing to being alongside this person for the next 5 to 7 years of your life. Your relationship with your PhD advisor is easily going to be one of the most important relationships you have for the rest of your life. And so making sure that that is a solid fit where you guys both like each other can be really, really important, really valuable as far as you thinking about like what your future career prospects are going to look like as well too. So you want that to be as positive as possible. So spend the time to like Zoom with them like a few times before you even show up or before you apply, just so that you can really get a good opinion on like who they are. Like you can also like talk to other grad students in their lab and such like that to get an idea of their mentorship, because they may be really good at talking to you, but like behind closed doors, they're like mean, which like happens. But yeah, so make sure don't sweat the social stuff. Those things are extremely important.
Excellent. So folks, I did put in the chat, but we've answered a lot of the questions in the answered section of the Q&A. There might be a way for me to actually download that as well and have it posted alongside this recording on the Botany360 website, which I've also linked in the chat. If there's nothing else, I guess we could end at the top of the hour. Thank you to all of our excellent panelists. We appreciate your time and expertise.